So a friend of mine said that he was at work and he's a Jew, and he saw this guy's name on the desk, and it had like something Israel or something. He says, "Oh, you're a Jew," and he goes, "Don't call me a Jew." He said, "Bleep the Jews." He said, "I'm a Hebrew." And I was like, whoa, this is some serious language to say. So tell us what you're presenting today when it comes to these people. Like, what do they believe? What is the point? Can you fill us in?
Well, Hebrew Israelism is a network of ideas, beliefs, and practices. And so people will talk about the Hebrew Israelites. I prefer to use the terminology Hebrew Israelism. And there is a precedent for that in religious studies. And so specifically, Anglo-Israelism, which came prior by about a century, originally was called British Israelism, but as it branched out and people in the Americas accepted it, they kind of got included in sort of as a stepchild of Europe was the way it was looked at, became Anglo-Israelism. And it was in multiple Protestant denominations in the United States, sort of just you had people here and there, a lot of mainline, a lot of even so-called fundamentalists in that time. But that kind of died down. But you had these interesting little groups like the Worldwide Church of God that continued it on. And then the Christian Identity folks kind of picked it up. So it became a lot of its modern versions are a lot more openly racist. Anglo-Israelism was certainly ethnocentric, but it was no Christian identity. But Christian identity is openly a racist system of biblical interpretation and worldview. With all that being said, Hebrew Israelism, sometimes called Black Israelism by scholars like Jacob Dorman, is sort of the flip side of the coin. And it says at the least, descendants of slaves in America are the true Israelites. It also says this: God exists and he cares really bad who your father is, meaning it matters in his sight in the way that you have standing with him. The ethnicity, really it's perceived ethnicity of your father. Also, modern day Jews are religious and ethnic imposters, and that's why your friend had those kind words for our friends with the hats. And then you also have maybe something else I would add to it that Hebrew Israelism always brings with it a tendency to have a strong emphasis on what they will call law keeping. Those are kind of the main components of the belief system. So it can have at its core Black Americans, but depending on the Hebrew Israelites faction they're involved with, can branch out. It can branch back to Africa and then sweeping up the Igbo people, for example. They largely dwell in Nigeria. Or it can go over to other oppressed peoples in the United States and include on the 12 tribes, Native Americans, and Hispanics. So there's a variety of ways in which it can be expressed, but those things are held in common by all of them. And it's also recognized at this point, last thing I'll say, by scholars who look at this, it's no longer appropriate or precise to strictly refer to practitioners as engaging in Black Judaism or Black Jews. Certainly, there is a legitimate study of Black Judaism. But when we talk about Hebrew Israelism or Black Israelism, it is not identical with Black Judaism. And so that's important for people to understand.
And so Vocab, the Black Hebrew Israelites, can you tell us a little bit about them? What exactly, who are they? Where did they come from? Where's their point of origin? And why do they refer to themselves as the Black Hebrew Israelites?
Well, in regards to the last one, a lot of the groups today don't like to call themselves Black Hebrew Israelites. They like to just call themselves Hebrews or the Israelites. They feel Black Hebrew Israelites is redundant and perhaps pejorative, they feel, these days. And scholars use the phrase Black Israelism. I tend to sometimes say Hebrew Israelism to be a little less offensive to them because a lot of them don't, like I said, don't like it. But origin comes from New York, although there was a lot of influence, it seems, from the South at various points. But when you talk about the origin of One West Hebrew Israelism, that's New York. But One West is only one particular strand of Hebrew Israelism.
Right.
So prior to One West being formed in 1969 in Harlem, there was a man named F.S. Cherry and another man named Crowdy, both who had some vision idea that, hold on, actually, Black Americans are the real Jews, and began preaching it. Crowdy's version was more inclusive. F.S. Cherry's was more exclusive. So they kind of represent the various strands even today, although it's not like everyone traces their lineage back to them. Most Hebrew Israelites don't care about the history of that because they just say, well, there may have been a reawakening or rediscovery, but Hebrew Israelism is not a new thing. We've always been Israelites. It's just where more people are waking up. So Crowdy's just one voice, but there's plenty of people. I mean, David knew he was a Black Israelite, that type of thing. Right. But as far as the reality of it, Crowdy and F.S. Cherry, and that's in the 1890s. Mm-hmm. Eventually what you get is a group in 1919 called the Commandment Keepers, and kind of just similar to Black Judaism, basically, but with some differences. And then a group came out of the Commandment Keepers, which was in Harlem, and they eventually landed at a school in One West 125th Street. And that's why sometimes the name is given to them, One Westers or One West Hebrew Israelism. And those tend to be the guys who engage in the most street preaching and make the kind of most sensational style videos. So a lot of people are more familiar with the more radical elements of Hebrew Israelism, but they're not representative of everybody. Certainly they're representative, but they're not representative of everybody. And so I tend to focus on the more radical guys. There's a lot of energy there, a lot of momentum there. But some of the other guys, like the Commandment Keepers, those types of Hebrew Israelites, that is very similar to dealing with it's all like you could read Michael Brown's books and engage with them. Now there'd be some extra elements there. Hey, we're the real Israelites, some extra elements, but a lot of the Egyptians would actually be very similar to what you might deal with, like the Jews for Judaism folks or something like that.
Right.
So now here we are in the age of the internet, and a lot of these guys were early adopters on YouTube. And it's like their content was almost made for the internet. It's over the top. It's sensational. It, makes you hate it or love it. It grabs your attention. It's outlandish, whatever. And so people, are sharing this stuff, and they've really spread, I think, a lot to the internet. But there's all these variations and varieties. Although a lot of people's first introduction, even people who adopt Hebrew Israelism as their religion, or they don't call it religion, but it certainly is. Some of their first experience is the more radicalized camps, so the One West variety, but it doesn't mean they all end up there and adopt all those ideas. But now, according to some data, we don't have a lot of data on this, Tony. According to the little bit of data we have, there's potentially up to 1.5 million Black Americans who identify as Hebrew Israelite.
Right. Okay. And what is there? I mean, every group has a we-they dichotomies, we versus them. So who do they believe are the, I'm sure that the white folks fit into their worldview. And I believe it's very negative, overtly negative. What's their view of other groups?
Well, it depends which particular Hebrew Israelite group you're talking about, but the real we-they dichotomy is really, especially with these guys, the Jews. Mm-hmm. This is an example of a Hebrew Israelite book that kind of talks about the other Esau, Edom, Rome, the hidden identity of the man of sin with biblical and historical proof. And you do have a lot of talk about, white folks who they call Edomites. Some Hebrew Israelites don't. Some say, no, they're descended from Japheth, not from Esau. But a lot of Hebrew Israelites do adopt the Esau doctrine, which they get from Genesis 25:25. Oh, look, he's red. White people are red if you slap them or leave them out in the sun. So really, they're red people, not white people. Right. And so they're Edomites. And then they can use all the prophecies against Edom, against America and white folks. Is kind of how that's the cash value of it. But really, they view the so-called Jews, is how they'll describe them, as the real enemy. Because they know the truth, they've supplanted their identity. They've essentially stolen the identity of the real Israelites. And so they'll say, yeah, that's why they're Jew Jewish, kind of like Jews, but not the real Jews. They'll say stuff like that. They're Jewish.
Right.
Islam was really, for me, what really opened my eyes to apologetics, being like, wait, I got to know the answer to all these different questions. And you start finding guys online and so forth. And then some guys that I was discipling, they were out in more closer to Venice, actually, I think at this time. And they run into some Black Hebrew Israelites. And they said, hey, I got into this debate and so forth. And I said, hey, this is the research that I have, and I'll give you a kind of a teaching on it. Most of it was just from Book of Galatians and so forth. But I said, there's this guy, his name's Vocab Malone. He does a great job on this subject, and you got to check him out. And then I did an episode on it on our 511 News show. And that is still the most disliked video that I think we put out, and probably the most amount of deleted comments because of the obscene things that were said, none other than about you. So I said, man, if we can get him on, I'd love to talk to him about, as you mentioned, Hebrew Israelism. Now, you could also tell me, I guess you could start out with telling me why the differential there of where we'll put in the title, Black Hebrew Israelites, and they would say, no, we are just Hebrew Israelites. But you can kind of just give us an overview of what on earth we're dealing with here.
Yeah, when people started noticing this phenomenon, you might say, of mainly Black Americans being interested and involved in Judaism, at first scholars would just say this is Black Judaism. That's what they would call it at that time, right? But then what happened is it branched out from not just being sort of Judaism or those types of movements to starting to incorporate elements of the New Testament. And when that happened, it was like, well, what are the similarities? And really the main thing is this central idea is that Black Americans are the real Jews. So there's a range and a network of diverse beliefs within Hebrew Israelism. But the central idea and the bare minimum idea is Black Americans are the real Jews. You can add other things, such as Hispanics are also part of the tribes of Israel, but not all Hebrew Israelites do that. You can add the New Testament or not. You see what I'm saying? But the key thing is, though, Black Americans are the real Jews. Like I said, there's other stuff there. And the problem is the other stuff is where all the heresy comes in. Because this idea alone, it may be historically dubious, Black Americans are the real Jews, but it doesn't reach to the level of damnable heresy. It's that you can't find that idea for whatever reason without heresy attached to it. And so I call it Hebrew Israelism. I'm not the only one. There's other scholars who call it Black Israelism. But the idea is to focus on the fact that it's a set of ideas or an ideology as opposed to just like a group. You know, Hebrew Israelites, that's like a group. But if you say Hebrew Israelism, the Israelism is understanding that this is an idea, a concept. And they would say, hey, look, Black Hebrew Israelite is redundant. Why do you have to put that on there? You're using that like it's a pejorative, even though if that's not the true, even if that's not someone's intent, that's the way they look at it now. And they'll also say it's redundant because Israelites are Black. But then other ones don't think all Israelites are Black. They just think that they would be included in the number. So, for example, Hebrew Israelites who believe in something called the 12 tribes chart, they would say, we're not Black Hebrew Israelites. Look, we've got Native Americans too. We've got Hispanics. So it's not what do you mean Black? It's not just so they would say it's not even accurate to try to use that terminology as well. And so there's debate about this, but what's interesting is really, if you study the history of this, it's only more recent that a lot of them started having problems with Black Hebrew Israelites. A lot of the groups used to call themselves or refer to themselves as the Black Israelites or the Black Hebrews. Some of them still occasionally do, but these days it's like, no, we're just the Hebrews. We're just the Israelites. But the problem is it's hard to just say you're a Hebrew, you're an Israelite, because you're essentially granting one of their claims, right? And so it's like, well, we don't want to do that. So a lot of times I'll put it in writing. I might put Hebrew Israelites because I know that Hebrews don't go by Hebrew Israelites, and Israelites or Israelis also don't go by that. So it's like only talking about that one group. And then I usually put it in quotation marks to let people know it's a contested phrase. And so that's one way to deal with it. But really, I try to focus on the fact that it's Hebrew Israelism. It's a set of ideas. Now, they don't like that. They'll say, what's that? We don't use that terminology. But there's a precedent for it, because prior to Hebrew Israelism, or Black Israelism, as some scholars call it, there's something called British Israelism or Anglo-Israelism, which is the idea that people of European descent and their descendants, such as those found in America, are actually part of the tribes of Israel. And sometimes they would add on the Jews, but sometimes they wouldn't. There's different versions of these beliefs, but that was about 100 years or so prior to when we first discovered Black Israelism. And so there's a precedent, because that was called by scholars and apologists alike as well, as British Israelism or Anglo-Israelism. So it's almost kind of falling on the heels of that idea as well.
But what is like a similarity? You'd say that something that it's a connective tissue, that this is one thing or maybe a couple things that everyone, it doesn't matter, what group they're with, everyone seemingly, if they're involved in Hebrew Israelism, they all hold to this or deny this.
Yeah, it would be this. Black folks are the real Jews, and those so-called Jews are fake. Those seriously are the two main elements. Now, you can add some other things in there that would be like the essence of Hebrew Israelism. Sometimes when I give a talk, I'll list out 4. And right now, off the top of my head, I actually forget what the other 2 are. I have to bring it up on my notes. But I can tell you those are like 2 key things there. Because I can't say that they all agree on the scripture, that they all agree Jesus is the Messiah, because none of that stuff's true. But they all do agree about this. We are the real Israelites, and those guys are fakes. Those 2 things are across the board. Another thing that is a commonality, I don't know if it's a central uniting tenet, but to an extent it might be, is the Judaizing or the legalizing tendency of them. So all of them have a shared conviction that, for example, the Christian church doesn't properly teach the law, that the church doesn't understand the law. And so all of them have that tendency to emphasize the law in a way that I think is foreign to the New Testament, unless you're talking about the heretics inside the New Testament. And so I would say that's another element that you can say, and then if I was going to add something else, it would be, there's a few exceptions to it, a denial of the Trinity. And you might even say denial of the full deity of Christ. But see, you can meet an individual Israelite every now and then who says they accept the Trinity, but that's an interesting exercise. When a Hebrew Israelite says they accept the Trinity, when you start talking about it, almost always they sound oneness. Now, I'm talking about rare exceptions even within the movement, because most of them are pretty hardcore, dead set against the doctrine of the Trinity. But when you meet one who says they're for it, they almost always end up sounding oneness. Or a lot of them will deny the deity of Christ. If you meet one who says they affirm the deity of Christ, talk to them, because a lot of times they sound like Jehovah's Witnesses. So the deity of Christ is he's a created deity in essence, right? Which is no deity at all as far as the Bible's concerned. Or he's one of many. A similar related concept where they almost take some of the idea of like a plurality of gods, and or that Elohim is this divine family and Jesus is one of the gods from the divine family. This is a little more sophisticated version of Hebrew Israelism. It's not common to run into these guys who overemphasize Psalm 82, for example, but they essentially sound polytheistic, some of them. But again, these are exceptions. Most Hebrew Israelites essentially deny the deity of Christ. They deny the triune nature of God. And of course, there's a legalizing tendency as well, where they essentially make the law a requirement for being in good standing with God. I can't even say to be saved, though, because most of their versions of what the afterlife and what the kingdom look like are all twisted and messed up. And like the guys who were betting on you guys to see which one of you guys would be slaves, those kinds of Hebrew Israelites, the One West Hebrew Israelites, they believe in something that I've termed ethnic universalism. Ethnic universalism. And that is anyone that we deem inside of this ethnicity is automatically going to be in the kingdom at some point. Now, they may go through a temporary punishment, but they will be in the kingdom. And that kind of ethnic universalism destroys the gospel, obviously. It's kind of like it's salvation by race through fate instead of salvation by grace through faith. It's salvation by race through fate. And so some of them teach that, like the One Westers. Other ones say, no, the wicked Israelites are going to be judged. And in fact, righteous Gentiles can be grafted in. So some of them would say that so-called Gentiles can still be in the kingdom in some way ahead of a wicked Israelite, as long as the righteous Gentile knows their place. Like the GOCC might say something somewhat similar to that, although it seems like they also hold to the ethnic universalism. And so that legalizing, moralizing tendency it's different than in Christianity because they don't even really mean saved in the same way. They just mean like you're partaking in a kingdom. And some of them have in that kingdom, as you mentioned prior, an idea of there will be in other nations enslaved to them eternally. Some even have the idea of sex slaves. Now, not all of them, but some of them do. So there's levels of like kind of how crass and vile they get. But that again, I got to reemphasize, there's distinctions within Hebrew Israelism. So Hebrew Israelite might be watching this chat and say, well, vocab didn't describe my beliefs. And that may be very well true. That's why I'm trying to tell you streams or strands. I'm not describing everybody because that's impossible.
Wow. Yeah. You really, you have a very unique ministry in that regard, really engaging with people in this movement. How would you describe the worldview of the Black Hebrew Israelites for those of us who have no clue what this is about?
The key element is we, and the question is, who's the we? Every group actually defines the we somewhat differently. So for now, I'll just say we, and ostensibly the person speaking is part of the group. We are the true biblical Israelites by blood. That's the key element. It drives everything, and it is what drives interpretation. It's what drives proselytism. It's what drives when someone leaves, the very first question they ask is, but do you still think you're an Israelite? They don't. That's the first question they always ask. Do you still think you're an Israelite? So it's central in the doctrine and the practice that we are the true biblical Israelites, and everything else is colored from there. And there's actually a lot of flexibility. You can hold Old Testament only. You can hold New Testament and kick out Paul if you want. You can be non-Trinitarian, which almost everybody is. There's a lot of flexibility at that point, as long as you hold to that central tenet.
Now, is this how new is this movement? Is it an African American movement, or was it before America?
Hebrew Israelites have a revised history, so they'll try to go way back and all this kind of thing. The reality of it, though, is that Hebrew Israelism is about 130 years old. Began in America, 1880s, late 1880s at the earliest, and more likely sometime in the 1890s. There's different dates with different guys. There's a little bit of confusion there. But you had two men roughly around the same time in that era who began preaching a message that we are the true people of the book. Black Americans are the Israelites. One was F.S. Cherry. He had a radicalized version that really cast out anyone else from being able to be part of this project, this plan, this awakening. And the other gentleman, William S. Crowdy, and both of them still have followers in churches today, Crowdy to a greater extent than Cherry. Crowdy was more ecumenical and egalitarian. And so he had followers of all types and stripes. He just had this vision, and he literally says he received a vision while he was in Oklahoma that Black Americans are the true Israelites. And some people date that to about 1896 as a common time when the revision is supposed to be received. And Cherry says he had a vision as well. And so it's older than people think. Its current iteration, though, has recently come on the radar. The current iteration is a bit different than what Crowdy and Cherry were doing.
Now, how does this worldview explain, if I can say, actual Jews and Judaism?
Well, I have never met, maybe they exist, anyone who calls themselves a Hebrew Israelite, whether they're radical or more moderate, whatever their stance is, that does not think so-called, this is their terminology, modern-day Jews are actually frauds. They're ethnic and religious imposters. Usually, they think most of them are descended from Khazars. So this is something that's been around. It actually, it's something that wasn't Hebrew Israelite in its initial inception, the idea that actually a lot of Jews are descendants of Khazars. It's a whole discussion about the Khazarian Empire and the Khazarian kingdom and the king converting and all this. So a lot of them think they're Khazars. But the One West variety, that's a certain kind of Hebrew Israelite, One West, it's not a name proper. It's more a designation of an ideology, like Reformed. There's not a denomination called Reformed per se, but it is a designation of an ideology within Christianity. Same thing with One West. Some of the One Westers, they believe they're actually Amalekites, like all the way back. You're talking like Haman. They believe that modern day Jews are essentially Amalekites. Now that's not all. That tends to be the one Wester variety, but they all think they're frauds. They all think they're imposters, and they think that Revelation 2:9 is actually about people that would call themselves Jews. Where it says those who call themselves Jews, and there Jesus is saying, if they're persecuting the church, then they're not really children of Abraham in the meaningful sense, because Jews were persecuting the church in those areas. And he's really just saying what he had already told the Pharisees: you're actually not really a son of Abraham. You're of your father, the devil, right? John 8. And that's what Jesus is reiterating there in Revelation. But they use it to say, Jesus was saying, hey, you guys say you're Jews. You're actually imposters. You're fakes. You're frauds. It's actually, they say it's one of the biggest cases of identity theft that's ever happened.
So he goes in and says, hey, we know that because the black people were sold into slavery and brought to America in ships, then Deuteronomy is talking about this. Part of me goes, Vocab, how do we take, there's people watching. Obviously, Jared is on here watching, and he, as far as I know, Jared, you're still in the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. We got people in the movement. We got people that have no clue what the movement is, no clue of all the different, sects out there. How do you start to try to help people understand how it came about? Let's start there. And then let's get into some of the scriptures they use like that and go, okay, are they taking this in context? Educate us here.
Well, Deuteronomy 28 is foundational to Hebrew Israelism. Here's a whole book. That's literally what it's called, written by a Hebrew Israelite. So that is very foundational, especially verse 68. They focus on the curses. And the way Hebrew Israelism started, there's some murkiness to it, but it's older than most people realize, but younger than most Hebrew Israelites claim. So we're talking post-Reconstruction. The late 1880s, early 1890s is the first time we have people explicitly saying black folks are the true Israelites. And the first two folks we have saying this on record both received this, according to their testimony, via a vision. A guy named Reverend William Christian, who essentially was a Protestant pastor really till the end of his life. He just also had this new element to his teaching, which was early Hebrew Israelism. And I have his book. It's available in the Library of Congress. And so it's publicly available on a website I'm getting up and running called HebrewIsraeliteInfo.com. So you can actually download the book from a website I'm constructing. And then the second one that we have recorded is William Crowdy. He's usually given credit as the first, but Christian appears to be before him. One from Arkansas, Texas area, and the other from Oklahoma, Kansas area. Now it's spread out later on. And Crowdy also says he received a vision. And both of these guys were pretty cool, to use a lack of a better phrase, with other ethnic groups. They didn't have the same kind of hard militancy that later Hebrew Israelites would adopt, but they did say we're the real Israelites. Later on, you get a guy named F.S. Cherry. Sometimes he's credited as the first Hebrew Israelite, but I've done deep research in this, along with actually some ex-Hebrew Israelites. And long story short, Cherry did not start in 1886 like he claimed. That was a lie he made up because he was only like 11 at the time. Cherry started later, but F.S. Cherry of Philadelphia did bring that militancy to Hebrew Israelism. He was a lot more militant in the stuff he would say, a lot more flamboyant, incendiary, a lot more imprecatory, to use a biblical phrase, regarding other peoples as he would have it. So that element was in there. And so that's kind of when we get started. 1919, very important congregation called the Commandment Keepers was established in Harlem, very kind of rabbinical Judaism, basically. And then 50 years later, 1969, a number of people came out of that group and established another smaller school in Harlem that eventually had the address of 1 West 125th Street. And all the kind of ideas really permeated, circulated there. And that's why we now call a certain strand of Hebrew Israelism 1 West Hebrew Israelism, because their address at the time was 1 West 125th Street. And that spawned a lot of different camps. In fact, the group you were interacting with there, Eric, Israel United in Christ, IUIC, the leader did attend the old 1 West school in Harlem, New York, till it disbanded, and he started his own thing, which is actually now the most successful 1 West branch there is, approaching 10,000 members. IUIC, the purple and gold guys, just their group alone. So we've come a long way, Eric.
And these, just so everybody understands, these are individuals who would say the black Africans that were brought over as slaves and their ancestors are the true Jews that the Bible is. So when the Bible talks about the Jewish people, it's talking about them. Can you explain, like literally from their perspective, how they're coming to those conclusions or where that's coming about?
Yeah, sure. And it is important to understand a correlation of that. Here's a book by a Hebrew Israelite. Correlation of that is that people that call themselves Israelites today are all frauds.
So yes, so they're saying all the people that claim to be Jews, the people that started the nation of Israel in 1948 and are claiming Judaism, are actually not the real Jews. So what would they call them? What would be their? A
lot of times they'll call them Edomites, but they're a little more specific. Sometimes they'll say Amalekites. Amalekites are actually a tribe related to Esau, and if you remember, Haman was an Amalekite. So sometimes they'll say they're Amalek. And sometimes they'll use other terms. They'll call them small hats or Ashka Nazis. These are terms that I've heard them use. They'll say stuff like that. And that's an element. It's like the pie is not big enough. They got to push someone out to get in there.
Well, how would you define what you called Hebrew Israelites, Hebrew Israelism?
I go with similar to what you say, Torahism. I do call it Hebrew Israelism. Some secular scholars use the term Black Israelism. I just go with Hebrew Israelism. And the central defining component is this. At the very least, there may be more, but at the very least, folks who are Black Americans are the true genealogical descendants of the ancient Israelites. And that entails certain things. It's theologically, soteriologically, ecclesiastically relevant. Okay. So it has real praxis to it.
Sure. Okay. So we're talking about a sort of racial component to Torahism, where, if I'm hearing you correctly, are you saying that the belief within that theology is that all Americans of African descent are actually part of the tribes, or just some of them?
Well, here's where it gets tricky already, brother.
We're already into it.
In general, the idea is if you came over here, your descendants came over here on a boat, then you're an Israelite. Okay. But as a convenient trump card, they keep in their back pocket that there could be tares sown amongst the Israelites. Usually they use that for apostates and things like that. And so it may be like, we thought you were a Semite, but actually you're a Hamite. Because these folks do not believe they descend from Ham. Their big thing is we descend from Shem. They don't even like the term Semitic. They like the term Shemitic. Okay. And so there is that element. And then it's a question with each individual Hebrew Israelite. Who else do they include? Because I remember I said at least. So some would include a lot of people on the continent of Africa. Others would say no, but they would include a lot of people in the Western Hemisphere. Okay. And so it depends what kind of Israelite they are, who they decide to include in their group that always includes them.
Okay. So is this it's not a monolithic movement? There's lots of different belief systems within.
Yeah. There's no Vatican City. There's no Pope. And it definitely is something that breeds and lends itself to a DIY situation. And that's why it is surpassing the Nation of Islam as the biggest alternative urban spirituality. Wow. Because it's not centralized in Chicago. It's not centralized around Farrakhan. There's a few offshoots of the NOI not a lot of people knew about. This is a different thing. There are what we call camps, what they call camps, all over. Right before we logged on, I was watching some guys in the UK because they were live out on the street, Hebrew Israelites in the UK, saying the same exact things that guys over here would be saying. And so it is a worldwide phenomenon, primarily within, I guess, what we might call Western civilization, but heavy in the U.S., and then it spreads out here and there. But it is also growing on the continent of Africa, different versions of Hebrew Israelism. So it is an up-and-coming religion. It is not an established religion, although it did come around in the 1890s, so it's been around for a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Man. Yeah. Well, can you define for us very briefly, what do they believe, and maybe speak a little bit to the variation within the group, and then we're going to jump right into the apologetic stuff. If folks really want to kind of dive into this topic, they can check out a more in-depth explanation on your channel, but maybe you can kind of briefly summarize give us the variations within the group, and then we'll just make some apologetic application from a presuppositional perspective.
Sounds perfect. Well, started in the 1890s in the American South, moved up pretty quickly, though, in the Northeast. It's seen a boom in the last decade, spread on physical corners and virtual, so to speak, Times Square to YouTube. And the basic essence is this, at least it's this. Black Americans are the true biblical Israelites. Modern Jews are imposters. Christianity is a pagan tool used to hold our people down. So you see a lot of it's there, kind of what they're against. But the main thing is, we're the real Israelites. Question is, how does any person, meaning the Hebrew Israelite doing the speaking, define we? They do not define the we the same. Some define the we as me, and that includes Black Americans plus Hispanics plus Native Americans. Others say, no, that's not right. Everyone who's an Israelite must essentially have a Black phenotype, but there's a bunch of people on the continent of Africa who would qualify, and some of them is spread out. So they go looking in different places, but they always include themselves. And Black Americans are always included in versions of, scholars call it Black Israelism because of that. I go with Hebrew Israelism, but there are versions of Hebrew Israelism that are strictly Black Israelism.
Okay.
And so that's the essence. Everything else is up for grabs. Everything is, but let me tell you some commonalities real quick.
Sure.
All versions are ethnocentric. You have some version of an ethnic hierarchy. Sometimes it's soft, sometimes it's hard.
Okay.
It's always there though. It's always present.
When you say soft and hard, you're just referring to the fact that some of them place a great emphasis upon that and others not so much?
In their ecclesiology, for example, if you're soft on the ethnic hierarchy scale, you may say people who aren't like us can come in to our fellowship, be grafted in, become part of us, and in some capacity, maybe even teach or lead. The guys out on the street with the signs and the stuff like that, they'll say, you're destined for slavery if you're not on the chart. So that's a big difference as far as soft or hard ethnic hierarchy. But even the ones who say you're grafted in all this, they still would view themselves essentially at the top of the food chain, because they're going to say something like, well, we're Judah, we're a priest to the other nations. And so, for example, if you're Chinese and you come in, you cannot teach us. You could only teach other Gentiles. That'd be a version. So there's partiality within their bodies, even if they look diverse. Their diversity does not entail orthodoxy. So that's what I mean by a soft and a hard ethnic hierarchy, but it's present in every version. So here's my point. If you see Hebrew Israelites and they got white guys or Asian guys, don't be like, oh, look, they're okay. Jehovah's Witnesses got that too. It doesn't mean they're Orthodox. And it's usually still some kind of ethnic hierarchy at play. All versions of Hebrew Israelism have some alchemy with works, meaning mixed in. It's not like they're going to deny grace. So, but it's like, what does it look like? It's some kind of alchemy going on there. And even their understanding of grace is almost always mutilated,
Okay.
And that's why there's this heavy emphasis on laws, statutes, commandments, because of that, and because of that, most of the groups have trouble with Paul. They either interpret him radically wrong, like the opposite of what he's saying, or they say that's his rabbinical opinion, or he went off there. And that's if they accept the New Testament. Because remember, to be a Hebrew Israelite, it's just you got to believe you're an Israelite according to the Bible. That could make you could be Tanakh only, reject Jesus as the Messiah. Okay. And there are those guys. They're not the main group, but there are those guys. It gets a little closer to Black Judaism at that point, but still not identical. Almost all of them never emphasize the gospel. And if they do, it's not the gospel.
Okay.
And so there's a problem of priorities, even in the groups that are a little healthier looking. Almost all of them reject the triune nature of God, the full deity of Christ, the personhood of the Holy Spirit. Almost all of them get into conspiracy theories of some sort or another that take them off the trail of what actual body of Christ should be doing, whether it's flat earth or chemtrails or Illuminati or something with the Jewish people. All these conspiracy theories cloud what should be happening
with a healthy theological vision and practice.
Yeah.
And honestly, this is just the tip of the iceberg with the problems. But there's a lot of diversity. That's why almost always I'll say almost all. But the thing of we're Israelites, those guys aren't, and the church is bad news. Those are almost all universal beliefs amongst all Israelites.
Yeah, that's what's up, man.